in our obsession with evidence-based medicine and almost this cult of like, I'm not going to move 1 inch unless there's data behind it, it's almost asking us to totally put our intuition and our kind of body awareness in the back seat. And that is to our great detriment, because in telling people to trust the science, but really implicitly saying don't trust yourself, we become the sickest country in the history of the world.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Welcome again to our program, The Empowering Neurologist. We have an amazing program for you today. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Casey Means. Now, many of you know Dr. Casey Means. She's the founder of Levels Health. If you're wearing a CGM or continuous glucose monitor, quite likely that data is going into the Levels Health app, and you're learning amazing things about what your blood sugar is doing, and more importantly, why, and more importantly, what you can do about it. But Casey Means and her brother, Callie Means, have just written this book called Good Energy, and I'm really, really hoping that you guys are going to read this book. Why? Because yes, it talks about metabolism. Yes, it talks about blood sugar, but it really unpacks why we are in the mess that we are in terms of, who's influencing our health decisions and why it's so fundamentally important that we take back our agency in terms of the decisions that we make day in and day out that relate to our health and fundamentally relate to our metabolism. So I'm very excited to jump in on this interview with Dr. Casey Means. Let's get right to it. Casey Means, it's not like I haven't seen you lately. I have, but welcome to the program.
It's so good to see you, David. Thanks for having me.
We had dinner last week in Topanga and played some guitar and that was an amazing evening, wasn't it?
It really was. It's just such a testament to how good it feels and how we also know it's good for our health to be with other people in person. We're on our screens all the time, and there's something just so enriching about being together.
Yeah. Good on Jeff Krasno to pull these types of things together. That's great. Connection being very important, but metabolism being really important. It seems to be what's so threatening to our health across the panorama of chronic degenerative conditions today, which are rampant. And the focus of your exciting book, I think that everyone needs to read this, and it is an absolute game-changing experience. So I think in a summary way, what my podcast has been about, for the most part, has been about metabolism, and not just that, but that, we are the arbiters of our health destiny based upon controlling our metabolism. That's what this book is all about. And I'm so thrilled that it's coming out and doing all the great things that it's doing. And as you may know, your co-author, your brother, I had the opportunity to interview a week or two ago, and man, oh man, that guy is sharp as a tack.
Yes.
A family of underachievers, that's for sure. But let's jump right in. I think one of the things you like to talk about is that, and it's true, we live in this sort of optimization culture that we're given all kinds of information for various reasons day in and day out about lifestyle choices, about certainly diet and other issues related to health, like exercise and sleep, etc. But I think you make it really clear that it's your feeling we're kind of missing the mark. Maybe you can open up a little bit from that perspective.
David, I think this is such a great place to start, because it feels like a lot of the conversation right now is about these micro optimizations and the biohacks and the protocols, and it can feel very rigid. And sometimes I just think we need to step back and really just make sure we're not missing the forest for the trees. Like American health right now, for the average American, it's not good. We have, 70% of our calories coming from ultra processed foods made in factories. Less than, 75% of people are not even getting the basic amount of movement. The average American's walking 3,000 steps per day. That's less than 2 miles. Like, we're not even close to hitting the mark. And I think sometimes when we get so focused on the rigidity and the protocols, it kind of can feel like more to just put on the to-do list that almost makes us feel like we're spinning, like, what's the right strategy? And I think what we really need is a big wake-up call of kind of going back to the basics and not majoring in the minors. There are basic things that we need to be doing as a country to support our metabolic health and to support our core foundational health that are simple. And I think a key message that Callie and I want to share in the book is that, complexity and confusion help industry profit. They don't necessarily help people. And actually, the solution to our metabolic health crisis is so much simpler than I think we're led to believe. We've got a multi-billion-dollar fitness industry, multi-trillion-dollar food and healthcare system. And the sort of simple truth is that it's actually not that complicated to be metabolically healthy, but we need to know where we stand and we need to know, kind of what our biggest levers are. So, that's kind of a big message that we have with this book is it's actually a lot simpler than we think. And putting joy back into the equation and actually like making this sort of fun and, like you were just talking about in the beginning, more community and a little bit more body awareness as part of the equation, I think is really important. We've been sold this sort of message over the last few years coming from on high to trust the science. And, you this practically plastered on billboards. And I think what's so interesting is that in our obsession with evidence-based medicine and almost this cult of like, I'm not going to move 1 inch unless there's data behind it, it's almost asking us to totally put our intuition and our kind of body awareness in the back seat. And that is to our great detriment because in telling people to, trust the science, but really implicitly saying don't trust yourself, we've become the sickest country in the history of the world. And I always joke like, there's not an obesity and chronic disease epidemic in giraffes or in gorillas. And, they don't have PubMed and protocols and experts. They're following more of their internal body intuition. And so I think the bottom line is we're losing our way. We're focusing on both minutia and the margins and kind of missing the big picture of a toxic environment that we need to just clean up with the basics for our health.
Yeah, and I think that we are, when I say we as a population, we are kind of led to believe that we can really do whatever we choose, and that will segue into some fix for whatever maladies that befall us. That eat the foods that marketing is telling us to eat, the ultra processed foods, etc. And ultimately, when we become diabetic, why there'll be a pill for that, or cardiovascular disease, or even worse, well, I don't know if it's worse, but Alzheimer's, I guess it is worse. In my world, that we are told, hey, let people do what they want. Don't pay any attention to metabolism, the basics of what you're talking about in this book, because we're going to have a fix. As it relates to Alzheimer's, it ain't there. It is not there categorically as we have this conversation right now. And yet everything that you are focused on in the book, sure, it relates to obesity epidemic, sure, it relates to hypertension, diabetes. I get that. Everyone will get that. But I really, for me as doing what I do, it is absolutely on the bullseye as relates to creating lifestyle choices that are nurturing the brain and helping individuals architect their brain's destiny. Right now, we're told, do whatever you want. We got these great new Alzheimer's drugs. And guess what? They don't work. And so people need to be confronted with the fact that when you start, again, as it relates to what I'm interested in, when you start going down that road where your cognitive function is declining, there's nothing for you. So that we've got to pay attention to good energy. This is the answer. And it is less difficult, I think, than people want to believe.
Yeah, I mean, Alzheimer's is the perfect example. You look at the data, and you know this better than anyone. The drugs aren't doing a lot of good for us once we get the disease. And yet, some of the simplest modifiable factors in our daily lives are some of the most effective at preventing or reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. One of the most astonishing statistics I saw in the book was that if people are walking between 8 and 12,000 steps a day, so basically moving a lot throughout the day, just low-grade movement, that is associated with something around like 40% decreased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in follow-up studies. What could be simpler than walking? This should be front page news. And we know that one of the reasons this is helping reduce Alzheimer's risk is because when we walk, when we simply move our muscles in a low-grade way, we are moving glucose channels from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. And when we move more throughout the day, we keep those channels at the membrane constantly taking up glucose and being processed by the mitochondria, keeping our metabolic and our mitochondrial engine active. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the brain is such an energy hungry organ. It uses up a huge percentage of our body's total energy resources, something around 20%, even though it's only 2% of the body weight. And so if we can just give the cells the ability through simple inputs like walking to be using energy, processing energy effectively, it has a monumental, and I would say differentially positive impact on the brain. And it literally couldn't be simpler than walking. Of course, eating
Yeah,
healthy whole
that
foods.
study was actually published in JAMA, and the sweet spot was about 9,600 steps a day. And the blog that I wrote on it said new medication reduced Alzheimer's risk by 50%. And, that was an attention getter. And I quoted the peer reviewed study that said, yeah, they followed, I think it was 12,000 individuals for a period of time and noted that they had on them an accelerometer in the day. That's what they used to measure their steps. Remember the step count that would bang against your hip, and then every time it did that was a step prior to the wearables. But that said, we recognize that things made from the muscles are good for the brain. A variety of things: interleukin 6, lactate, who knew, irisin, BDNF, all of these things that the muscles act as an endocrine gland targeting the brain. We activate that endocrine gland when we use our muscles, i.e., when we are active. But you said something very, I think, interesting. You said, "Don't trust doctors, don't trust the science, don't trust me," meaning you. Trust yourself. And it was a call, I think, for this idea that we have innate knowledge. We do have an innate sense about what is right and what is wrong. And, one of the, I think, messages of the book is to start listening to ourselves in terms of decision making and taking that decision making away from people who want to manipulate our decision making for their gain, not our benefit.
Yeah.
So how is that being received, that you're telling people to get back to common sense like this?
Well, I would say that a key point here is that we say, trust yourself on chronic disease prevention, because it's there where the healthcare system is abjectly failing at preventing and reversing these chronic lifestyle acquired diseases. Certainly on acute issues, if you have a trauma, broken bone, you're having a complicated childbirth, you have a life-threatening infection. This is where our healthcare system shines and where we have produced miracles. But the problem is that the miracles that have been produced in acute disease management, we have basically asked people to transfer that trust to the chronic disease management and prevention. And medicalization of chronic diseases, which are caused by diet and lifestyle, has been a complete and utter failure over the last 50 to 75 years.
You gotta say that again. I mean, that's your book. That's your mission, and mostly my mission in a nutshell.
Yeah. As we treat these,
the system has failed
the
us.
system has failed us. And as we spend more to treat these chronic conditions, the rates are getting worse. So there's this mismatch between the effort and the outcomes. And I think there's this opportunity there to really empower people to get back in touch with their own agency in the progression of these diseases. And I think there's two aspects to this. And step one is really learning to understand the signals from your body. And this is why we say trust yourself. It's not like blindly trust yourself, because, the idea, someone might be sitting down with some French fries and say, well, I really want these and I trust myself and to eat these. So it's not just like going towards your whims. It's about, tapping into two things. One is body awareness and actually really learning to hear the signals from your body as gifts. And two is leveraging the beauty of the modern world we live in, which is technology that helps us actually see inside our bodies and understand where we stand in terms of metabolic health. So from the symptom perspective, it's like, what's so interesting about our culture today is like, if you have a symptom of almost any kind, we have been basically trained to think we got to squash it. And if you actually just go into a CVS or a Walgreens or any pharmacy, basically those are big hubs of how do I squash a symptom. If you have a headache, here's an Advil. If you have reflux, here's a Nexium. If you've got a rash, here's cortisone cream. That's what those aisles are. They are symptom squashers. So what's the subtext there? symptoms are intolerable and I need to stop them. In reality, your symptoms are a direct conversation from your body to you, trying to get your attention to say from the cells, my needs are not getting met, or I am being overburdened with things that are not helping me. And so that's step one, is slowing down enough in the middle of this busyness industrial complex that we live in to actually hear and respect the signals from the body and use them as gifts and language from our cells to guide us towards meeting the needs of our cells. And then part two is using the beautiful technology at our disposal, the wearables like the Oura Ring and the Whoop and the Fitbit, to tell us what's going on with the inputs to our body, to use the lab testing that now you can get through your doctor or through direct-to-consumer companies like Function Health and Levels and Inside Tracker and Next Health. And then the bio wearables that have come out now, like continuous glucose monitors from Levels, which can actually give you a movie of what's going on with your metabolic health. So between getting back in touch with our body awareness and leveraging the tools to understand and track our key foundational aspects of health, like metabolic health, we do have the opportunity to sort of take more control and to guide our own health journey. And, that unfortunately is the most disruptive thing that could possibly be happening to the healthcare system right now, which is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States. And honestly is predicated on people not being aware of what's going on with their own health. And so I think that there's really a vision in this good energy message to really help people understand, like, the system's not changing fast enough. And we actually have to really take ownership of our foundational cellular health. And we can do that through the amazing tools at our disposal today.
And I think, an important message is that our health, but more importantly, our illnesses, are valuable to others. And that, the game is rigged. The game is rigged to keep us unhealthy, such that, this sounds incredibly cynical, but I think you do a great job in exploring this. The game is rigged to keep us unhealthy such that it's profitable, not for us, but it's, in terms of health, but it's profitable for others who seek to utilize this avenue for basically, weaponizing illness in terms of profitability. And it is the way it is, but I choose to look at the bright side, which is, books like yours. I want to hold it up to so everybody gets a sense. Again, good energy, a great book. So that said, it's really about reclaiming agency. And the blessing is that we live in an age where we have the opportunity to gain more agency because we can get more personal data, and we can become familiar with the data that we're getting about ourselves, and then make those appropriate changes. And I want to just go to Levels Health a little bit, because Levels Health is a way that people can look at their glucose measurements over time, in real time, and gain an understanding in terms of personally, what is the effect of the various choices I am making day to day, be they food, be they sleep, exercise, etc., stress, in terms of this fundamentally, perhaps most important metric of all, and that is our blood sugar. So here you are practicing ENT, if I get the story right, and the next thing you know, you're founding a company, Levels Health, to do continuous glucose monitoring and help people understand the data. What's that leap looking like? How did that happen?
Yeah. So I had trained as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. And what was so interesting about training in that field is that literally every single disease I was treating as an ENT surgeon was an inflammatory condition. It was sinusitis, laryngitis, thyroiditis, parotitis, cellulitis, otitis. Like, I could go on and on. It's all the itises. And itis is, as you know, the suffix that means inflammation. And as I was finishing my surgical residency and about to kind of launch into the world as an independent surgeon, this kind of idea hit me like a ton of bricks, which was like, I'm treating inflammation day in and day out as an ENT doctor. And I know how to diagnose these conditions. I know how to drug these conditions. I know how to operate on these conditions. But inflammation is fundamentally the body's threat response. Like, it's the army in the body to sort of like respond to a threat. And there's a piece of this puzzle that I have not learned, which is, what is the threat that the body is responding to with all of this chronic inflammation that I'm treating as an ENT doctor? And it just was sort of like, wait a minute, this seems like a huge, huge piece of the puzzle. I haven't learned what is inspiring the body to be chronically inflamed? And I would go as so far to say, even having gone to Stanford and all these great institutions, it was almost like you start the conversation with these conditions with the inflammation is there, but don't talk about like what are the things actually triggering that. And nothing arises in a vacuum, right? So it's like there's got to be something there. So I actually, as I was going out on my towards my independent career post residency, I thought, if there's a piece of this I don't understand, I don't really feel comfortable like essentially operating on people when maybe there's something we could be doing to like reduce the chronic inflammation that's not just the heavy hammer of steroids, surgery, or sort of our conventional strategies. So as I traced that thread, it led me directly to metabolic health. And this is a piece of the science that I think everyone needs to understand. Metabolism is the most foundational process in our body. So everything in health is built on top of metabolism. And the reason that is the case is because we have tens of trillions of cells in the body, and they all need energy to do any of their jobs. Energy is required for all the cellular activity that allows our cells to work and generates organ health and overall body health. So if metabolism's not working, nothing can work. And 93% of American adults now have metabolic dysfunction. And what's happening is that the environment that we're living in, the modern industrial environment where we're indoors all the time, sitting all the time, constantly stressed out, not sleeping enough, eating 70% ultra-processed foods, it's crushing our metabolic processes inside our cells. All those things are hurting our mitochondrial health. And so what you've got now is a country of people whose cells are metabolically dysfunctional, therefore are not producing adequate energy to do their jobs, therefore become dysfunctional. And this shows up as chronic diseases all throughout the body, including in the head and neck where I was working. And so what's this link between metabolism and inflammation? It's so simple. What could be more threatening to the body and fear-inducing than cells that are underpowered and cannot do their work? That is petrifying to the body. And so these cells that are metabolically dysfunctional, they actually initiate this incredible process in the body called the cell danger response, where they literally, through mitochondrial, essentially dysfunction, send out signals to recruit the immune system to come help them. I don't have power. I can't do my job. I need help. But the immune system can't do anything to help this cell that's mitochondrially dysfunctional and underpowered, because the immune system can't do anything about the environment that is actually damaging the cells. So then what you get is this vicious cycle of underpowered cells, metabolic dysfunction, sending out alarm signals, the immune system desperately trying to help, creating a lot of collateral damage as it tries to fight this war that it can't win. And this is the root cause of pretty much every chronic disease and symptom we're facing in the US today that have exploded over the past 50 years as our environment has rapidly changed. So how that led to levels was that this was a huge wake-up call for me, kind of ripped me out of my slumber. And I thought, I have to figure out as a doctor, how do we help people both understand their level of metabolic health and figure out how to improve it? Because the system, this is the biggest blind spot in healthcare, is the healthcare system's not thinking about this root cause physiology. They're focused on managing the symptoms downstream of this problem. And so that led me to, teaming up with my co-founders at Levels, because there's this amazing technology, continuous glucose monitors, which people can literally put on their own arm and see in real time what's going on with their metabolic health. And so that was the path from ENT surgeon to ultimately blood sugar entrepreneur and now writing this book, is that, frankly, I think a lot of the surgeries we're doing for ENT issues, and probably in every specialty of the body, if we truly help people heal their cellular health, we'd probably be able to avoid a lot of these surgeries for chronic symptoms and diseases.
Well, I think if you wanted to look at and try to delineate what those surgeries are, you'd look at the various itises and ask yourself, well, what's the joint surgeon doing, taking care of inflamed joints? What's a cardiovascular surgeon doing? Ultimately, cardiovascular disease is an inflammatory condition. Call it like it is. Alzheimer's, that we don't do surgery for yet, but this is so focused on exactly what you just described. This notion that these immune cells are underpowered, are metabolically compromised, what it does in the brain to those specific immune cells that we call microglia and astroglial cells is it shifts them to becoming the bad evil twin. So these actual one cell can shift from being supportive and nurturing and loving to the brain cells to being one that digests brain cells and destroys synapses. And this is central to Alzheimer's. And downstream of this metabolic compromise of the cell because of the insulin sensitivity loss is then the accumulation of beta amyloid. And yet, the targeting of beta amyloid is the central focus of the pharmaceutical development right now that looks at ways of either reducing formation or getting rid of beta amyloid in the brain. It's the consequence. It's the smoke. It is not the fire. The fire is the inflammation brought on by metabolic issues, exactly what you described. The brain needs insulin just like the rest of the body. So you develop this company then that gives the users a powerful new tool to really understand what's going on with cellular metabolism, looking at how cells are powered or underpowered, to use your words, and not just as a snapshot every 12 months, but in real time, constantly, to let people understand what is the effect upon powering my cells of the sleep or lack of sleep I had last night, this particular food that I ate, the fact that I am fasting, whether I am stressed or not, whether I'm socially connected, all these factors that actually weigh into ultimately powering or not cells, and that ultimately leads to even variations in immune function such that we develop the various itises that you were training to treat surgically. So you were treating kind of the end product, much as Alzheimer's treatment is treating the end product of beta amyloid. And really what you're doing is going way upstream to the very source of the river. And that is this dysregulation of metabolism, focusing on glucose. People are wearing this glucose monitor. They're getting real-time information on their smartphones, but then you do a lot of clever things with that data. Well, hi everyone, Dr. David Perlmutter here. We hope you're enjoying this content, and if you would do so, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you're not already a subscriber to our channel, please consider doing so. We're really grateful to have you as part of our community, so let's get right back to the presentation. And I'd like to explore that a little bit more deeply. What does Levels Health do with the data that helps me then understand the nuances of my blood sugar control?
Yeah. So basically, if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, this movie of your blood sugar is coming into your smartphone. And what Levels does is help you take this essentially glucose curve, this line, and unpack what all of it means. We pair it with wearable data about your sleep and your heart rate and your activity levels. People log their food in the app. And so we understand which ingredients might be causing a glucose rise. And so we can say things like, okay, you had a meal at noon, and then we noticed that you took a lot of steps right after your meal, and your glucose came right down very quickly. But when you ate a similar meal and there were no steps after that meal, you had a much higher spike. So helping to draw out these connections with people like, okay, if I move for a little bit after my meal, I can actually get a much more stable glucose response, which I know is going to make me feel better day to day, because these big crashes and spikes in our glucose can make us feel tired and post-meal crash and jittery and even have brain fog and have lots of cravings for more carbohydrates. So it makes me feel better to keep my glucose more stable during the day. And now I can figure out what things help me do that. So walking after a meal is an example. Similarly, you might do a couple different variations of a meal with like different additions and see which keep the glucose more stable. So you might have a banana on its own, or have a banana chopped up in chia seed pudding with almond butter and walnuts. And the addition of that fat.
Did we just have that?
What's that?
Did you stay around for dessert the other night and we had that?
Yeah, I did not. Is that what they served?
Oh my gosh, because you had to leave early. You had a conference, as I recall, at 9 p.m. But it was late. But we had that for dessert. It was made with allulose, actually.
You're kidding.
It was and avocados. It was over the top.
Oh my gosh. So yeah. So like learning, okay, there are desserts that I can have that keep my blood sugar stable. Maybe I swap out, my boyfriend and I pretty much twice a week, we make these almond flour chocolate chip cookies with date sweetened chocolate chips and allulose instead of sugar, and they don't cause any glucose response. But if I were to eat a regular cookie with refined white flour, refined ultra processed sugar, and regular chocolate chips with regular sugar, I would have probably a huge glucose spike. So
I
you
bet you
start to
would.
tease out what ingredients, what factors, how to balance meals, how to even sequence meals. Maybe I eat my protein and my fat in the beginning of the meal, and then I eat the more starchy foods later in the meal to kind of balance it out a little bit. And so that's the type of things, these simple strategies that people are learning through the Levels app and through the different algorithms. And we now also have macro tracking. And so people can actually really understand, if I eat this much fiber per day, I have better glucose control. If I eat this much protein per meal, I have better glucose control. So that's been something members have been asking for a long time that we now have. But I think the most amazing thing is what people find out that's not about food. So understanding how not getting enough sleep, or, a time change when you're traveling, how that affects your glucose, or how a stressful meeting or a stressful conversation with someone can cause our glucose to rise, and how there are so many non-food factors that actually play into our glucose levels that if we don't keep an eye on them, these things can build up day after day, week after week, year after year, and really compound. So learning these things and just really working each day to try and, support glucose control through all these different aspects.
And again, we'll stress for all of our viewers that this is the most important thing that you can do, that controlling your blood sugar is the fundamental. I mean, that's where it all begins as it relates to your heart, your brain, your liver, and in terms of fatty liver, which, it makes me think about children a little bit. I mean, we're seeing 18% of teens have fatty liver disease. Some 30% of teens or more are now pre-diabetic. So I think you described it as sort of a moral imperative for us as adults that we're not doing necessarily right by our kids, and whether they're our kids, but I mean in children in general, by not being more vociferous as it relates to the crap that is being pushed onto them in terms of what they're eating.
I mean, I think it's an absolute moral stain on our country that we are the wealthiest country, the quote unquote most educated country in the world, and we are our children's health is absolutely being decimated. And it's not, we're not mincing words here. Like, kids' health is plummeting. The mental health issues in children, 40% of 18-year-olds with a mental health diagnosis, like you said, 18% with fatty liver, a full 30% of teens with prediabetes, a condition that endocrinologists might have never seen, a pediatric endocrinologist may have never seen in their career 50 years ago. We've got, it's astonishing what's happening to children. And this is parents' fault. We're creating this world for children. And the children born today are unlikely to live as long as their parents are going to be able to live. The life expectancy is going down every year in our country. And so it is a moral stain, I think, on our country. And it is entirely rooted in metabolic dysfunction, how this food environment that we've normalized is just crushing the cellular health of kids. And then couple that with, the sleep deprivation that kids are having because of technology and just crazy early school start times. We've got social media just flooding their eyeballs with fear-inducing media from a very early age that absolutely just crushes our metabolic health because our psychology has a big impact on our mitochondrial function. We've got, the average child is spending 93% of their time indoors these days. So we're not getting the circadian cues from the sun. And then load on top of that, we've got 80,000 new synthetic toxins in our food, water, air, personal care products, homes, electronics that are just constantly bathing us in a potentially toxic stew. So adults are doing this to children. Children did not create this world. And I think that when we really understand that it's a metabolic mitochondrial crisis in our children right now that's showing up as all these conditions. And this is all just a science experiment basically from the past 50 years that has failed. And so we all need to wake up as adults and unpack what went wrong, which we know, the ultra processed food, the social media, the environmental toxins, no, being indoors too much, and we need to reverse course. And that's really the vision and the call to action. And it's really not that complicated.
That is indeed the moral stain, as you characterize it. You mentioned that 25% of kids in 2020 contemplated suicide. Wow. I mean, when you think about what's going on inside children's brains beyond cognition, but in terms of mood disorders, et cetera, Dr. Christopher Palmer, as you know, wrote a wonderful book called Brain Energy. I would urge you all to watch. He was on this podcast, just a brilliant Harvard clinician / researcher who really, I think, characterizes these psychiatric issues in children and adults as being metabolic and having a mitochondrial play involved here. That's really not just, I think, valuable from an understanding perspective, but from a therapeutic perspective as well, which is really what Levels is all about. It's getting that fuel situation. It's not that there's not enough fuel. There's plenty of fuel, but allowing insulin to do its job, we lose the functionality of insulin when our blood sugars become elevated. How will you know if you don't measure? And I think back a couple years ago, you and I have talked about this before, there was that editorial or op-ed in JAMA at the time that these continuous glucose monitors were starting to take hold. And the question was whether they should be available for non-diabetics to people in general, which now we see that they are. And there was such a pushback at that time that, well, why should people be able to know their own blood sugars? I mean, after all. And I think, what you're doing is saying, well, of course people should know their own blood sugars. I mean, we allow people to buy a bathroom scale so they can find out what their metabolic state is as it relates to their body weight. Why on earth shouldn't they know their own blood sugar? Because, people have this misguided sense that the agency for their health and metabolism needs to be offloaded to a doctor who knows so much more than I will ever know. And what you're teaching people is that A, that's not true. And B, now you're going to know specifically what's triggering your blood sugar spikes in you as an individual. In terms of personalized medicine that your doctor will never try to understand. For me, it was cashews, by the way. I found that cashews spiked my blood sugar quite significantly. Who knew, right? I thought cashews were going to be great, but time and time again. So, I have to be careful how many cashews I eat. I don't know why. There's some snip in my primordial background. We'll leave it at that. This isn't about me. But I think the point is that, we have access to some amazing technology, wearable devices that are empowering, that are allowing us to finally take agency. Our doctors are not going to be able to do this and are not able to do this. And here's an example. If your doctor says to you, come in for your annual blood work, you're already off target. The idea of checking your blood sugar annually is beyond ridiculous because you're getting a snapshot. And most people do this. They really don't eat much the night before. They're not supposed to. You really train for the test. I know a guy who stops drinking 1 month before his blood test so he could get good results. It's so ridiculous. Anyway, you're going to get a blood test of this most fundamental parameter. Would you weigh yourself once a year? No, people have a bathroom scale. They weigh themselves frequently. Would you check your blood pressure once a year? I don't think so. Why on earth would you look at this one, perhaps most important metric at your annual blood draw and hope that your doctor doesn't say you're in the normal range? That makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I feel it right now at the back of my neck, in the normal range. Nobody watching this podcast or reading your book, the normal range is not good enough for any of them. We want people to be optimized. And as it relates to blood sugar, the reason I choose to wear a CGM and have my data looked at in the Levels app is because it's a lot of reasons. My dad died of Alzheimer's. It was awful. I mention it quite a lot because I want everyone to know I'm part of the club, that I want my health to be good and be around a long time for all the reasons. And it's blood sugar. Yeah, everything else is important too. Uric acid is important. All the other parameters, knowing your sleep status, how much you sleep, the quality of sleep, all important. But I still have to agree that on that top of that list is knowing every nuance possible about my blood sugar, not your blood sugar. If you want me to know about your blood sugar, you'll tell me and I'll help you. But you don't need any help.
Yeah.
But that said, this is the most important thing for global health, I believe. And in the big picture, and that's what good energy is about, the big picture is that the world is conspiring to mess up my blood sugar and the blood sugar of everybody else on the planet by the provision of these ultra processed foods, making up 54% of calorie consumption by the average American, that are doing what? They're disrupting the function of insulin in the body and leading to those horrifying statistics. I'm going on and on. Those horrifying statistics in children and adolescents that you just quoted, and those neuropsychiatric issues that we're seeing in children that are a stain on our morality as adults. Again, that these issues are metabolic issues of the brain and directly relate to those lifestyle choices that aren't really choices. They're lifestyle issues that are put upon us, that social media, that advertising is making us think are the things that we should be doing. And I just realized I'm interviewing you, but
No, preach, David.
I
mean,
say
we
those
are
things.
just
So, because where we're going with this is so fundamentally important. And, I'm really hoping that good energy is on everybody's bookshelf. No, not on their bookshelf, on their bedstand,
Yes.
so they read it. Because on the bookshelf, you bought the book. I thought it was important, but I never read it. What's the good of that? So, what's the feedback like with respect to good energy?
I think the beautiful thing we're seeing is that I think people are really ready for a message of empowering foundational health. I think we all know that something's not quite right in our country. The trajectory we're going on, it's not right. I mean, that's not to be a doomsday situation. The world we live in is a beautiful, incredible world, and it's awe-inspiring and it's incredible. But when it comes to the health of our children, ourselves, our parents, things are not going well. And so I think there's a real hunger for a really holistic, science-based, but also common sense-based approach to how to be healthy. There aren't obese giraffes in the wild, and yet somehow they function without all the the PubMed and the diet wars. And so there's a bit of a mix of, let's get back to common sense. Let's also look at the best of the science, but not be so wedded to the minutia of the science that we totally miss the forest for the trees. And, I think also going back to that concept of simplicity, I think, when it comes to understanding our metabolic health, that can be really simple too. We get in the weeds a lot about, advanced lipid testing and ApoB and micronutrient testing. And there's a lot of intensive testing in the functional medicine space. And that's all great. I'm a big fan of testing. But I think almost sometimes we can get so in the weeds on this. It's either like the crappy basic lab work that our doctors do once a year, or we have to do the $5,000, panels with a functional medicine doctor. But the reality is that everyone listening can actually probably this week get a few tests that we know can give us a really good signal of sort of a check engine light on our metabolism. And so those are ones that I really want to make sure people know. And I know you know these, but it's like basically the metabolic syndrome criteria. It's like, just look in your labs from last year or ask your doctor to order these for you. They will not fight you on these, and they are usually free. But get a fasting glucose, get a fasting triglyceride, get an HDL cholesterol, get your blood pressure, and get a tape measure and figure out your waist circumference, and then get a hemoglobin A1C. Those 6 blood and, biomarkers basically that are both from blood, but also waist circumference and blood pressure together. The American Journal College of Cardiology published last year that if we're meeting what they consider normal criteria for those biomarkers, we make up just 6.8% of the country in terms of better than average metabolic health. They call it optimal metabolic health. I would say there's still room for improvement in some of those ranges that they put forward, but the ranges that they give for what they consider optimal is fasting glucose less than 100, triglycerides less than 150, HDL above 40 for men, 50 for women, waist circumference less than 35 inches for women and 40 inches per men, blood pressure less than 120 over 80, and hemoglobin A1C less than 5.7%. And basically they said, if you meet all these criteria, not on medication for blood sugar or blood pressure, then you are part of basically a fraction, 6.8% of Americans who essentially are in the right direction for metabolic health. And these, again, are labs that are generally free from our doctor. So we can talk about fasting insulin and CRP and liver function tests and certainly uric acid and all these amazing tests that are so important. But I'd say most people probably don't even know where they stand on those very, very basic biomarkers. So start there. And then, of course, in the book and in your work, we have so many other recommendations for higher level tests that you can get, like the ones I just mentioned. And that can give more richness and nuance, but at least know the basics that you don't have to fight with your doctor about. And that'll give you a great start.
These are the big, big issues. I think if people get their blood sugar under control, if I could get that wish that everybody's blood sugar is under control, think about what the manifestation of that would be. I want to flip around a statistic that you just used, and that would be that that 94% of Americans have 93 to 94% of Americans have at least one abnormality in the very things you just delineated, meaning that there are precious few American adults that are actually metabolically intact. And that's a sad commentary because it's certainly very clear that that's brand new and explains that why the World Health Organization characterizes the chronic degenerative conditions as the number one cause of death on our planet. Not some virus, not trauma, not starvation. It's chronic degenerative conditions, overfed and undernourished, based upon our consumption of what we think we should be doing, and television ads that say, "Well, I'm happy because my A1C is below 7." That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous parameter that was actually dreamed up by the manufacturers of these drugs, diabetic drugs, based upon their parameters that were used during testing. They couldn't really get the A1Cs down to levels that were really meaningful in terms of health. So they're advertising, I got my A1C below 7. I'm happy. And, let's look at where the A1Cs need to be. And, in my world, we begin to see increased risk for brain shrinkage at around 5.8 on the A1C. It's so lower in this regard is certainly better. And a lot is said about diet and controlling things like blood sugar. Dr. Sarah Hallberg has done some amazing research. Her new book, posthumously, came out, I think, this week. Oh. And, she demonstrated reversing type 2 diabetes by putting people on a ketogenic diet. Who knew a dietary change could be so dramatic? We've seen ketogenic diets do other effective things metabolically, like help depression, help PTSD, help schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, for that matter. Again, solidifying this notion that these are fundamentally metabolic. Hence, you need to know, as you said earlier, that you're powering your cells. Is insulin doing its job? How will you know unless you get that movie by wearing a continuous glucose monitor of your blood sugar, and then use your app, which is what I do, to look at what the data means in terms of the choices I make each and every day. So what a 1-2 punch. Levels Health and your book, Good Energy. I mean, I was honored to write that op-ed with you for MedPage on the added sugar to our diets, 10% of calories being a good thing, or at least acceptable according to the USDA. You and I countered that. We thought that was ridiculous, wrote an op-ed to President Biden at the time. But you're doing some amazing stuff. It's breathtaking. And I remember we had dinner in Las Vegas, and I turned to you and I said this, and we were a little bit speechless for a moment, prior to the book, of course. But it's breathtaking what you are doing, and your brother as well. I mean, really quite game changing. So I want to applaud you for that.
David, that means the world. And you know this, but you have been the biggest inspiration to Callie and I for years and years and years. And we wouldn't be able to do this work without you and the partnership and your incredible brilliance that you've spread for literally decades now. So I just I honor you so much, and we're just carrying the torch that you have lit. So but no, like you said, it's like if there was a wish for the world, it would be for people to understand that any of the suffering any of the suffering we're feeling in our life, or any delta between where we are and the health that we dream of, like the health that we deserve in this one brief, precious life that we have, the delta, a lot of that can be closed by thinking about your cells with compassion and really thinking about how can I, with my daily choices, give my cells and my mitochondria what they need to work properly, and that keep them, sane and not confused and not in a sense of fear and threat, and not overburden them with things that we know can hurt them. And I love to think of the body like the 40 trillion cells. It's like they're all these little like babies that I need to that I'm like, as the human, I'm charged to kind of care for all of them like a parent. And like,
as well as the trillions of bacteria
and
that
the
live within
100
you.
trillion bacteria in the gut, like they are mine. And when I give them very simple, basic inputs in a consistent way, clean, unprocessed food, sunshine during the day, good sleep, quality sleep, emotional health, connecting with people I love, taking deep breaths, going to therapy, meditating. And when I move those cells, when I move them through space and give them some activity and play and protect them from toxins, if I just do those basic things, they will create the life for me that I dream of, of just true joy and happiness and health and long life. And it is really that simple in a lot of ways for most of us and for most conditions. And so just not to get too caught up in the minutia and just focus on what really matters, and really just supporting our metabolic health. And in that, we actually cut through a lot of the complexity. We have literally over 100 specialties right now in medicine. We keep inventing new specialties. And the more specialties we create, the sicker we're getting as Americans. So how do we actually get back to the root and the trunk of the tree, when fundamentally get back to a place of connection in our healthcare journey, seeing the connections between the diseases, seeing the connections between us and our food and the air and the soil and the microbes and the sunlight, and the connection between us and other people in meaningful, loving relationships as key to our health as well, and a sense of safety in our bodies. All of that matters. And so I think what the real message of this book is to reimagine a future for humanity and health, which is, one and the same, that's based on connection rather than silos and fragmentation, this false construct that we've built multi-trillion-dollar systems on, which just aren't working because they're not respecting our true nature as totally connected beings, both internally, but also ourselves with everything else around us. So that's what we need to move towards. And I think it will be a much more joyful place for us to go in our healthcare journey as well.
Well, Dr. Casey Means, thank you for joining us today. This is as important a message as can be. So again, thank you for your time. This is terrific.
Thank you, David. So good to see you.
See you soon.
Thanks, David.
Well, that was quite an interview. I think it's clear that we have a special bond, Dr. Casey Means, and I do. I so value the work that she's doing, and her brother, Callie Means, as well, and the whole organization there at Levels Health. But the book, Good Energy, is really something to behold. I had the opportunity to read it in advance, and it really sets the stage for why we are in the mess we are in terms of these chronic, pervasive, degenerative conditions being related to the choices that we make, and calling out how our choices in terms of lifestyle, predominantly food, are so highly influenced, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of others. I hope you read this really empowering book. And thank you for joining us today here on the Empowering Neurologist. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, and we will be back soon. Bye for now.